Welcome to the 207th installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. When John Lumen was a teenager, growing up on his family's livestock farm in the 1980s, he had a tough love epiphany of sorts. A plain-talking student from New Zealand was staying with the family, and he made it clear that he didn't think much of the way operations like the Lumen enterprise did things. Raising row crops and forages, hauling them to the cattle, and then hauling away the manure was way too much work, said the student, and it didn't make sense financially. It can be hard to listen to criticism, but later, when John was in college, he spent 6 months in New Zealand working on a livestock operation, and he became convinced that the exchange student was onto something. John observed how New Zealand livestock producers focused more on profit per acre than profit per animal, and reduced their cost of production as much as possible. One of the ways they did this was by allowing cattle and other livestock to harvest their feed and spread their manure via managed rotational grazing. In short, the animals do the work of producing meat and milk, and the farmer serves as a manager of the process. Today, John and his son Jared raise a cow-calf herd as well as row crops, some of which are certified organic, on 720 acres in southeastern Minnesota's Goodhue County. They utilize managed rotational grazing to harvest feed from perennial pasture grasses as well as cover crops. By focusing more on profitability than all-out production, the Lumens feel they've been able to create an operation that generates a good, sustainable income. In fact, such a focus on cutting costs and squeezing more profit from each acre helped make room for Jared to join the operation when he graduated from college in 2015 and John's father David retired from farming. On a recent summer afternoon, the Lumens hosted a Land Stewardship Project Soil Builders Network Field Day, where participants saw how they are integrating livestock grazing and cover cropping to develop resilient, profitable soils. They also saw how the Lumens' focus on per-acre profit means utilizing strategies that are not the norm in mainstream agriculture, such as raising smaller cattle and grazing land that is considered prime crop ground. After the field day, I talked to John about the benefits of creating a system where the cattle do the work of not only feeding themselves, but building soil health.
I did have a bit of an epiphany back in the 1980s. I was just a teenager, maybe 14 or so, and we had a student from New Zealand come and work for us for 1 year. And he told us how foolish we were over here and how far behind they were. They were much more advanced, and we were just kind of stupid.
Goes over really well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people would have would be prideful and just say, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But I don't know, that kind of perked my interest in learning more about it. And so then I went to work after I was in college for a couple of years, I went through FFA on a work experience abroad to New Zealand for 6 months. And I worked there and I kind of discovered that there was a very different way of doing it. And they have a real low cost mentality, but it's not just about reducing costs. They're very focused on profit. And we talk about sustainable agriculture, but if it's not profitable, it's not going to sustain itself. And they were willing to do things different, and they made their livestock industry, they made their animals do the work, and the people just kind of manage it. And you become much more of a manager than actually slogging it out there, delivering feed to cows, hauling the manure away, cutting the grass so that they had the food. You're making the cows do all that work, and you're managing it in a way that's profitable. So it makes sense to talk about production per animal, and we've heard that story for quite a long time, and there's good reason for it, but it really is the wrong goal. You really need to be looking at profit per acre and trying to figure out a system that works to improve profit. And we've just decided that, with studies that have been done out there, that they're, for us in the beef anyway, that the smaller cattle and having more of them, more cattle that are smaller, producing more calves that are smaller is much more profitable than trying to select for high weaning weights. And that's been kind of the mantra of university talking for 40 years, and the size of cattle has gone from 1,000 pounds to 1,500 pounds or more per cow. And yes, you do get a little bit more weaning weight, but it isn't that much more, and you end up feeding a cow that's 50% bigger. And I just think that there's too many people that are believing that and following that idea, and it's really hurting their income because they're focusing on production, trying to do everything right, and they're not doing the right things. And you can do everything right, but if you're not doing the right things, you will not have profit per acre.
Well, and I think that's it. What's nice about this is it works. It dovetails nicely with the system you've got here with the mob grazing and the rotational grazing, and the idea that you aren't a real big fan of haymaking, both for from a quality of life standpoint and economically. And so, if you do focus more on that profitability and not getting those cattle to be such bigger sizes, you can have them kind of get their nutrition from poorer quality forages that sometimes you have in a grazing system and not be focused, sounds like, so much on high quality hay, that kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed over the years, and you can't just focus in on production and the price of tractors, the price of hay balers, the price of pickup trucks in the last 40 years has gone up, I think, 5 or 6 times what it was. And the price of cattle has only doubled in that time. Those are rough estimates. But that means when the economics change, you have to consider a different paradigm. You have to think a little differently than just doing the same thing and just striving to be better at it. And just trying to be better at it isn't good enough because it does change the whole economics. And right now, the economics of doing all that work for your cow so that she produces a little bit more just does not make sense. It's better to focus on getting your cows to work for you and reducing your labor. Labor is very, very expensive compared to what it used to be. In my dad's generation, you could easily get kids from other farmers that had 5, 6 kids to come over and help you throw bales. But nowadays, you're going to pay minimum wage to everybody and or more to get them to do that kind of work. And you need to look at things differently. And for us, it's making the cows do the work for us and managing the whole system so that it works with less labor.
You had on your row crop acres, you're certified organic, and so you had kind of a rotation where you were, I think, putting in pasture every 3rd year, but you kind of decided, even though that's tillable land, maybe there's some areas that just should remain in pasture. And talk a little bit about your decision making about changing that rotation system that you're looking at.
Yeah, there's a big difference in the value and the rental price of tillable acres compared to pasture acres, but it's not a solid and black and white issue. There's lots of acres that are tilled that probably shouldn't be tilled, and I guess you can either do it with no-till raising crops, or we consider that the benefits of grazing with mob grazing and cover crops and that type of thing, that we're able to make just as much income or profit per acre with grazing as we could if we put it into row crops.
So one of the things that I think is a real positive is your son Caleb has come into the operation. I think he graduated from college in 2015, and that you've been able to, it sounds like, kind of by focusing more on profitability and often a situation like this, somebody a son or a daughter comes into an operation, you're going to have to look at, you're expanding your land base to make room for that, but you haven't had to do that. Can you talk a little bit? That sounds like, so far anyway, yeah, you've been able to kind of make room for him kind of with what you currently have set up a little bit.
Part of that answer is my dad worked really hard up to the end. He's still alive, but he's not able to work anymore on the farm, and he's just been a workhorse. So Jared's just filling in right in his spot. But the income has been good, and we've been profitable year in and year out doing this type of farming, and just focusing on that. But I guess the issues we've really tried to deal with the last few years is the lifestyle. And I love farming and I love the work, but there can be a point where it gets to be too much. And I was talking with someone today too about how they love it and it's working, it's a 7-day-a-week job, but that's the reason, I guess, probably that 2 of my sons didn't want to farm, because they saw the disadvantages of that. And if you don't have that passion for agriculture and farming like I do and Jared does and my dad did, and then you just look at it as, why would anyone want to work 70 hours a week? And So a couple of years ago, we decided to just stop the hay production system for selling hay. We used to raise a lot of dairy organic hay, and it was okay. We made money on it. We weren't losing money, but when we looked at all the costs of it and what it was doing to our soil to sell all that nutrients off, it wasn't worth the effort, and it was competing for the same time in our machinery for our organic crops. And the organic crops were lucrative, and the hay was just marginal, and just decided that it was better to feed the soil than it was to try to make a few extra bucks. And that's hard for people to let a few dollars slip away from you that you could have had, but you have to decide whether it's worth the cost, and value all the costs, not just the dollars you might pay, but the economics, but also the environmental costs. And we were losing a lot of fertility, and then we'd have to buy in manure from someone else to make up for that fertility, and that's more work too. So, now with mob grazing, we're handling our spring flush by mobbing it down and just leaving that residue on the soil, and we're only taking maybe 40% of the forage in the spring, and the rest we're feeding the soil with. So we've been able to kind of get rid of that spring flush somewhat. We take some hay off of it, but then we're just kind of mobbing it down, and in the middle of the summer we're feeding the soil with our cows, and then in the fall we're trying to get higher utilization in our pastures to extend our grazing season so we don't need as much hay.
It sounds like you really don't see a disconnect between soil health and profitability, that's a very important thing to you, trying to build that soil health. And I guess, are you starting to see that connection where my organic matter's is getting higher in certain fields, and it's producing more profit for me, kind of thing? Or are you starting to see that connection a little bit?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I don't think our organic matter levels have gone up that much in our system, just having done it now for a year or two. It takes a few more years to see that, but where the cattle are able to be grazed and mobbed down, or where we've seen our biggest advantage is what we do in the winter, where our cows are in the winter when we're feeding hay, feeding it out on the land. You collect so much more of the nutrients to stay right on the soil, and it doesn't cost you anything to have the cow deposit it right where it came from or wherever you want to build the soil. And I think a lot of the old-time feedlots, pretty much the urine of the cow was lost. They could maybe scoop up the manure, but the urine pretty much ran off into the ditch or was evaporated away. And that's where most of your potassium is. So for years when we were selling hay or feedlotting cattle, we were losing most of the potassium component, and we were spending money buying potassium. Well, now with mob grazing, all that residue is letting the potassium leach back into the soil, and it just makes the next growth much more vigorous. Or winter grazing, where the urine of the cows is from eating the hay, they're depositing that right back, and we're getting tremendous growth. And the increased organic matter is making it through when there's periods with less rain. And also by mob grazing, you have more forage sitting out in front of you. So when it's dry weather, your forage is shaded from the sun. The soil is, so it doesn't dry out as quick. And you've got that forage supply sitting in front of you, so you can go for a longer period of time without rain, without running out of grass. And when you're grazing short grass, the roots are also short, and they need rain every week or they're in trouble, where we can go for weeks and weeks without trouble. For more on the Land Stewardship Project's Soil Builders Network, see landstewardshipproject.org. There you can find fact sheets, resources, videos, and information on upcoming workshops. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-722-6377. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.